Hello, so we start with session 4, tools and implementation of the UNDROP. After the adoption of the UNDROP in 2018, the process entered a new stage, implementation. And this means that we are now faced with the task of putting into practice what we have been discussing, negotiating, advocating for many years. The adoption of a legal instrument at the UN is not an event in itself, as to advance in terms of realization of peasants' rights, we need a proactive strategy of promotion, led, of course, by the rights holders. Of course, we also need public authorities to implement the UNDROP, but we should not forget that the role of public authorities, and in particular of the legislative and judicial powers, precisely depend from the correlation of forces and from the proactive, coherent and focused strategy that peasants and allies will develop to push for the implementation. So this is a task that we need to tackle now collectively. And in this video, we will discuss in general terms about the implementation process and what can be done via common concerted strategy at different levels. There are, of course, different axes of work in which we could engage to drive the implementation process. And I would like here to underline that there are no preconceived implementation models possible. There is no one implementation process that all organizations can apply. Each organization has to elaborate its own strategy according, of course, to the characteristics and the realities of its own country. However, it might be useful to look together into some of these axes that could be seen as a common denominator, a starting point in the elaboration of strategies of promotion and implementation of the UN. So the first one is the work of awareness raising and information to disseminate the UNDROP, to explain its content and to show its utility to society as a whole. So not only to the people in communities directly concerned, peasants organizations and activists already working for peasants' rights, but also to a wider audience, public authorities, officials, other institutions, NGOs, academia, lawyers, etc. For example, the creation of the new brand website on the UNDROP that we have been presenting in this formation meets this objective. And in addition, also for this first axis of work, it would also be important to consider the importance of building cross-sector alliances. The second point, the second axe, is training. So push for the capacity building of the organizations, of the people, push for knowledge and for a process that fosters taking ownership of the UNDROP, mainly addressing the rights holders for sure, but also other people, other sectors that need to be trained in order to be able to use the UNDROP and promote it. A third point, a third axe could be the one focused on advocacy and monitoring of the implementation of the UNDROP. This is key because monitoring will allow to identify the gaps and the violations that still persist. And it's also important to make sure that the process of implementation corresponds to the needs of peasants in the ground, avoiding instrumentalizations by other groups and sectors that may arise, group and sector that may not embrace our strategy and goals. And here we could work, for example, on reports to monitor the situation of peasants' rights in each country. We could develop analysis of national policies, norms, national legislations on issues related to peasants' rights, always in the light, of course, of the content of the declaration. We could then develop advocacy efforts with concrete proposals for public authorities, for parliaments, on how to better implement peasants' rights, proposing the elaboration of new laws, new norms, or the revision or repeal of existing ones, for example. Thus, monitoring is an absolute key step for advocacy. And finally, as part of this third point, it is also important to consider developing monitoring and advocacy efforts at the international level. This is precisely why Via Campesina and its partners, CETIM, FIAN International, the Geneva Academy, are advocating, first of all, for the integration of the UNDROP into the mandates of existing UN mechanisms and bodies. And in our website, you will find articles exposing the results of these efforts. Furthermore, one central element here that has always been part of the international strategy following the adoption of the UNDROP is the demand to create an international follow-up mechanism in the form of a UN special procedure on peasants' rights. This mechanism will be very important because will allow to monitor the monitoring by independent experts of the implementation of the UNDROP in UN member states. And this work can be followed by the issuing of recommendations on best ways to advance with implementation. So the mechanism could, for example, recommend to put an end to a specific practice that is in contrast with the UNDROP, could recommend legal developments in the light of the UNDROP, etc. The mechanism will thus serve also a space of dialogue, of constructive engagement of civil society and the independent experts with the governments, as well as a space where to exchange ideas, exchange good practices. And finally, this mechanism will also allow the submission of complaints, concrete cases by the organizations in case of violations of the rights enshrined in the UNDROP. The creation of a new special procedure is necessary because it will allow to address peasants' rights as a whole, as an interdependent and articulated set of rights. Because in fact, existing thematic mandates allow us to grasp peasants' rights only from one specific thematic perspective, not being enough to coherently tackle them in a holistic and systematic manner. And to conclude, I would just like to emphasize again that the UNDROP is indeed a concrete tool for change and transformation of the current pillars of the food and agricultural system. A bulwark for peasants and rural people against the dominant agribusiness sector. And to advance in terms of promotion and implementation is key that